Asterisk, welcome to Midnight Whispers. Tonight's story will take you to the town of Ravensgate, where the claw doesn't stop at 12, but strikes a 13th time. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support keeps the darkness alive. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen carefully. The 13th bell is about to ring. Asterisk. The ferry cut through the black water like a blade, its wake folding behind us into the night. I stood on the deck with my hands in my coat pockets and the taste of salt on my lips, watching the lights of Ravensgate waver in the fog. The town rose from the coast in a choked staircase of slate roofs and chimneys, all of it crowned by the crooked silhouette of St. Geraint's bell tower. I hadn't seen it in 12 years. I had hoped never to see it again. The wind carried the smell of kelp and old wood. Gulls circled, white slashes against the dark. Somewhere behind me, the ferry's cabin door swung and clapped, and a woman cursed softly as it jammed. The engine coughed, then settled into a hum. I listened for something else, something I remembered from childhood, though I'd told myself 100 times that memory was a liar. It came as we crossed the last long strip of water, the town clock chiming midnight. 1, 2, 3. The notes sank into the fog like stones into a well. 4, 5, 6. I counted with the rhythm I had learned as a boy, half hypnotized, always hoping it would stop at the number it was supposed to. 7, 8, 9. The ferry horn answered, a low, mournful call. 10, 11, 12. Silence gathered, and then hesitant, thin as a thread pulled too tight, there was a 13th bell. Not a mistrike, not an echo, a quiet, deliberate chime that seemed to look over its shoulder as it came. I closed my eyes. On the deck, someone muttered an old prayer. The ferry eased against the pier. Ropes flew. The ramp dropped with a hollow clatter. Ravensgate waited, a shape behind gauze. I told myself it was only a superstition. Clocks slip, hammers stick, metal swells in damp air. But you don't come back to Ravensgate to argue with physics. You come back because a friend goes missing and the last message he sent you says only listen at midnight. You'll hear what I heard. Noah Hawley had been the stubborn Sortan amateur field recordist with a tin ear for self-preservation. He chased sound the way storm chasers court tornadoes, windhops under bridges, drunk choirs in the rain, the moan of winter through telephone wires. He wanted them all. When he told me he was headed to my hometown to catch the 13th bell, I laughed. When he didn't return my calls for 3 weeks, I stopped laughing. I walked off the ferry into fog that soaked my hair and eyebrows in seconds. The pier boards were slick. The ropes smelled of brine and tar. The harbor shupsel shuddered toward one another like conspirators. Even in darkness I recognized them. Grady's Chandlery, the Net and Gannett, a bakery with windows filmed in sugar. A cat ghosted under a bench without a sound. The Net and Gannett sign swung overhead. A wooden gannet with a tangle of netting in its beak. I pushed through the door, and warmth hit me stove heat and breath and the low murmur of men who know one another too well to talk loudly. The inn looked smaller than I remembered. A bar polished to a low sheen, 6 tables, a hearth with 2 chairs that might as well have been claimed by ghosts. The landlord looked up as if he'd been expecting me. "You're Ward," he said. "Always swore, and still are." "Elias Ward," I said. "I need a room." "You'll have it," he said, "and your hands are shaking, so the first pint's on me." He pulled a dark ale and set it in front of me. I hadn't realized my hands were shaking until the glass knocked against my fingers. "You heard it," he said. "A misstrike," I said. "Probably." He didn't argue. People here rarely argue out loud. He put a brass key on the bar instead. A number was stamped into it, and beside the number, someone had scratched a tiny circle with a line through it as if to cross out a moon. "Room 3, he said. "If you go out after midnight, don't say I didn't tell you." "Tell me what?" He cut his eyes toward the hearth, where a pair of old men stared into the coals as if they might rise and speak. "The roads turn wrong after 12, he said. "Sound carries where it shouldn't. You'll see." I carried my pint to a table and drank without tasting it. The landlord pretended to dry glasses. The old men pretended to remember a world without fog. I took out my phone and scrolled to Noah's last message. "Listen at midnight. You'll hear what I heard." He had attached a 40-second audio clip I'd already played 100 times. Wind hissed, a distant brittle chim counted 12, and then faint, pleading 13th. On my second listening in the bar, I noticed something I hadn't heard before. Between the 12th and 13th bells, a voice, not a word more like the shade, a word left behind after it burned. I turned up the volume. The landlord's hand closed on my wrist. "Don't he?" said. "Not in here. Why? Walls have memory," he said. "Same as bells." I pocketed the phone. He nodded once, like a man who'd just won a small argument with the weather, and went back to polishing. Room 3 had a narrow bed and a window that looked toward the harbor. Condensation webbed the panes. Someone had left a Bible in the drawer and a cistern key on the sill. The wallpaper had dark blooms where damp had eaten the paste. It smelled like old apples and iron. I poured the rest of my ale into the bathroom sink to avoid dreaming stones for teeth, set an alarm for 11:57, and lay down fully dressed. When the alarm chimed, my heart was already awake. I sat up and opened the window. Fog pushed in, as if it meant to own the room. I propped my phone on the sill, opened the recording app Noah had built for me years ago, his only successful gift, a button that made any sound feel like evidence, and waited. The town's silence was a net that dragged 4 miles, far out in the dark. A buoy rang a hollow gargling note. Somewhere to my right, a gull complained as if about the quality of the fog. Time flattened. It does, when you're waiting for something you both dread and desire. Midnight began like a bruise. 1, 2, 3. On, for my hands felt like they'd been dipped in ice. 5. 6. 7. The old tower's voice had more weight than I remembered, perhaps because I had grown quieter. 8. 9. 10. Something moved on the street below, just a shape. Quick and low, like a dog without a leash. 11. 12. In the breath that followed, I swallowed and found I had no mouth. 13. It was softer than Noah's recording, but closer, as if the bell had been rung in the bones behind my ears. The fog in the room shifted with it. The glass of water on the bedside table quivered. Somewhere behind the inn, a chain clinked, very gently, as though a small hand had tested it. I stopped the recording and listened to the silence that came after. It wasn't silence. Not exactly. It was a word held between teeth. "Elias?" I jolted, knocking my knee against the bed frame. I hadn't meant to say my own name aloud. I hadn't said it. The voice had been a whisper from the hall, too soft to carry, except in a town built to carry soft things. Salt. Fog. The floorboard outside my door sighed. "Who's there?" I said. "Because you always say it, even when you know." The floorboard sighed again, a little further away, toward the stair. I stood, took the key from the sill without knowing why, and eased the door open. The hallway was a gray throat. Down at the turn, the landlord's cat sat on the runner, ears forward. It looked at me with an expression I've only ever seen on animals and surgeons. It blinked once, deliberate, and turned its head toward the stairs. If to say listen, I did. What I heard was not footsteps. It was not breathing or cloth, or the shift of a body against a banister. It was the soft, repeated ring of metal on metal, like a small hammer finding a bell somewhere it shouldn't be. I followed the cat. No one with any sense follows a cat at midnight in Ravensgate. It's how old stories begin. But I had already begun. The stair protested under my weight. The common room was dark, the stove down to sullen coal. Bottles caught what little light there was and made thin green ghosts of themselves. At the front door, a curl of fog coiled inward, bold as steam. The cat stopped at the door and sat. The ring came again, 2, 3 times in the street, tinny coaxing. I opened the door. The square was empty. The fog had the texture of wool. I could have reached out and plucked it. The only shape I could make was the silhouette of the bell tower, a knife in the cloud, and then something brushed past me cold as a river in January, quick as a child, late for supper. It moved inside, past my legs, without touching my clothes, and ran up the stair. The cat's fur went vertical. It hissed at me, not at what it entered and bolted after the thing I could not see. I turned to follow and froze. On the inside of the inn door, just above the latch, a wet print had bloomed. The crescent of a small palm, 5 splayed fingers, the lines of skin as clear as if pressed there from a bath. It was lower than any adult could have placed it, and under the print, written with the same wet finger, a single smudged word. Listen. I shut the door and locked it and stood with my back to it. my breath working like a bellows. Upstairs, I heard the cat run the length of the corridor, pause, scratch once at a door not mine, and fall silent. I waited for the landlord to call out. He didn't. If he had heard it all before, perhaps he slept because there was nothing left to learn. I went back up and found the corridor empty. The runner rumpled where the cat had slid. At the far end, room 5's door was ajar. A draft curled out brine and something tannic, like old tea left in a kettle too long. On the floor outside lay a single ribbon of black cloth, frayed at the ends, tied in a figure-8 knot. I picked it up. It felt warm, though my fingers were cold. On a whim or a habit, I held my phone near the gap in the door and pressed record. The app's little waveform began to shake. At first, all I heard was air passing across the microphone and the infinitesimal sound of my own skin. Then, under it, under everything, a sound like a bell rung, not with a hammer, but with a breath like lungs learning metal. A voice threaded the bell tone. Not know us. Not. An old voice that remembered soul. Elias Ward, it said, soft as a closed hand on a shoulder. You came back. I stopped the recording and stepped backward until my spine found the wall. The ribbon had tightened in my fist until my knuckles went white. The window at the end of the hall showed nothing but my own reflection, pale and smaller than I thought I was. I didn't sleep. At dawn, the fog went to silver and then to dirty milk. The gulls resumed their stupid arguments. The landlord's radio muttered the shipping forecast like a prayer. I went downstairs with the ribbon in my pocket and asked him for coffee and a name. Who keeps the town records now? I said. Old parish ledges, bell maintenance, missing persons. He wiped his hands on a towel that had been washed too many times to remember its first color. Maravin? He said. She minds the library and the church keys. Will she speak to me? If you have questions about bells, he said, Mara will answer until you wish you hadn't asked. He poured coffee and slid a plate with 2 slices of toast toward me, as if we were actors in a play we'd been staging for years. As I ate, he set a little object on the bar between us. At first, I thought it was a coin. It wasn't. It was a circle of tarnished bronze, the size of my palm, with a hole at its edge, as if meant for a cord. 3 words were stamped into it in a shakier hand than the metal deserved. Admitted to choir. I looked up. He nodded at the ribbon, peeking from my pocket. As if he'd known it would be there. Found that token in the cistern last spring, he said. Found the ribbon outside room 5 3 nights ago. Men don't wear ribbons like that. Children do. Choir children. What choir? He smiled without showing his teeth. and I remembered how a man can smile when he wants someone else to carry the thing he has set down. "Ask Mara," he said, "and take care where you stand at noon." "Why noon?" "Because time is straight then," he said, and tapped the token. "And because bells don't lie when the sun can see them." I slipped the token into my pocket beside the ribbon and finished the coffee because it was there. Then I stepped out into a town I had left because of sound and had returned to because of silence, and I headed uphill toward the library where Mara Venn kept keys to doors that hadn't been opened since the last time the 13th bell learned my name. The library kept its breath like a chapel. The door complained softly as I pushed in, a sound that seemed embarrassed to exist. Inside, the air was the dry quiet of paper and old cloth, sunlight thin as watered milk filtered through leaded panes, and settled on rows of spines, the color of drowned leaves. A bell on the desk, a little handbell. No clapper tilted toward the door like an ear. Behind it, a woman with salt-stitched hair and a cardigan the color of anchors wrote steadily in a ledger. She did not look up until my shadow crossed her page. "You're late," she said, and then, before I could answer, "No, that isn't true. You're on time. You're Ward." "Elias," I said. "You must be Mara Venn." She closed the ledger, slid a ribbon between its pages, and at last regarded me, her eyes with a gray you only find by the sea, the color the sky uses when it is tired of choosing. She was not old, not young. She had the sort of face that librarians grow, the way certain trees grow bark. "You brought a token," she said. I hadn't shown her anything. Still, I put the little bronze circle on the desk beside the bell. The light found it, ticked across its surface, and dimmed in the stamped words. "Admitted to choir." "And a ribbon," she added. "Choir child's. Button cord weave. Third form." She held out a hand. I laid the ribbon there. She turned it once, not judging, not fearful. "Room 5 again," she said to herself, and made, with 2 fingers, a small notation in the air as if the library extended beyond the walls. "I came about Noah Hawley," I said. "He was here 3 weeks ago." "Of course," she said. He asked for the Hollis maps and the bell book. He recorded my watch when it stuttered at noon. "Your watch stuttered at noon in Ravensgate," she said. "Truth keeps a schedule, but schedules don't always keep truth." She rose. Keys chimed at her HIPAA custodian's ring, but older, as if the iron had memory. "Tea," she said. "Then records. Then warnings. Not in that order, perhaps." She led me through stacks with a sailor's certainty, touching here a spine, here a switch, here a chain that lowered a lamp, as if she were adjusting a ship for weather. We emerged into a room both round and wrong, the curve of it too immediate, as if the walls had leaned in to confide. In the center stood a table scarred by ink and compass points. On it sat 3 objects: a narrow ledger bound in cracked blue, a box of index cards yellowed to the color of nicotine, and a map case whose leather straps had been replaced by twine. Under the twine, in a dry, careful hand, someone had written, "Street Geraint mechanism. In substructure. She set the kettle on a spirit stove with a librarian-s disregard for fire codes and opened the blue ledger. This, she said, is the choir roll, 1849 to 1913. The pages had been ruled with almost musical severity columns for name, age, voice, status, notes. The names began in neat copperplate and deteriorated into a series of hands that fell asleep on their pens. Children, primarily. Beside a few names, the note admitted to choir had been impressed with a stamp like a parish seal. But a different, darker stamp repeated more than I liked. Retained. What does retained mean? I asked. Not returned, she said. Kept by duty. Or doctrine. Or something people mistook for either. She advanced to a page where the headings had faded and the ink had grown watery, as if written under weather. The hand had written Choir of 13, and beneath it, Sanctus warning, watch. 13, I said. She nodded. Ringing changes required 12 common, enough for a good peal. The 13th was not rung for change. It was rung for notice. Notice of what? Of what you've already heard, she said, and turned the ledger so I could see a note scored diagonally in a firm, irritated hand. When the 13th answers the 12, lock your doors and keep the children under the bell. Under the bell, I said, not away from it. Mara looked at me as if measuring the distance between what I knew and what I could bear to know. The tower has 2 sets of bells, she said. What you see in the belfry and what you don't. The town calls the second the underbelannold practice. In plague years, when they feared the air itself, they believed sound could scour. Children were sat beneath the underbell's arch while the peal ran itself raw. It kept some alive, or so they wrote. She loosened the twine on the map case and drew out 3 sheets that had loved a wall once sedges pinholed. Corners softened. The first showed the church and tower from above, with its gearings and wheels and beams drawn in little brother lines, as if the draftsman had adored the mechanism more than the building. The second showed the crypt's honeycombs and Runnel's cistern marked with a cross, a note, overflow to harbor culvert. The landlord left a cistern key on my windowsill, I said. Because he knows, she said, that the shortest distance between rooms is not always. The third sheet was neither plan nor elevation, but an act of faith. Substructure acoustic had been written at top, and below it, as if mapping wind, the draftsman had drawn swirls and arrows through voids and walls. At the base of the tower, lower than the crypt, lower than the cistern lay a circle annotated resonance cavity. From that circle, arrows rose like breath. Underbell, Mara said simply, no clapper. The tower breathes it. The 13th is not a strike, Ward. It is an exhale. The kettle shivered. She poured into 2 mugs that had once advertised a museum, handed me one, and with her other hand slid the index box between us. Disappearances, she said. I drew a card at random. Whitmore, Margaret. Ella, 1872. Handwrote Voices in Walls. Last seen at St. Geraint. Another. Unpaid fine forgiven last borrower. Hollis acoustic plates. What are acoustic plates? I asked. She smiled into her tea. Tin prints of sound. The foundry in 1849 pressed plates against the tower to feel frequency under the skin. Hollis traced them slow needle on smoked tin. They look like seaweed or handwriting. Noah photographed them last month and said they sang better than the tower. He left anything. Notes? Mara took from the ledger drawer a worn notebook with a rubber band bleeding color into its cover. She set it on the table with a care I have seen given to bones. Halefield Book 7 was written in violet pencil. I opened to the last pages. Noah's hand was quick. Astonishingly clean when he was excited, sloppy when he wasn't. He had sketched the tower's profile, then drawn, with an engineer's love, a series of little cup-shaped forms beneath it, like lungs. Notes braided the margins. 0 o'clock to 0:12:12 bells, as expected. Slight drift in 4. 7, 0, 12, 0, 13. Ambient drop 5 to 6 decibels. Pressure thins. You'll feel it in gums. 0:13 non-strike event. Breath. Fundamental 83 Hz. Subharmonics low enough to make your bones measure themselves and below. In a sudden penknife of anxiety, if it knows your name, don't answer. If you answer, don't listen. If you listen, don't follow. If you follow, you'll walk wrong. I closed the book. My name felt like a weight I should set down. Why me? I said. Why does it they know me. Mara's fingers hovered over the choir ledger, then descended 3 pages from the front. She turned the book so I could see Ward. Elias had been written in a careful school script. Age 10. Voice treble nervous. Status probationary notes. Mother refuses admission. A second hand had added. Removed. The ink in removed was smudged, as if written by someone who had written it while walking away. I had no memory of it. Childhood's pail can hold oceans, and still remember only the coat hung on its handle. I looked up at Mara. She did not soften. Places keep the shape of those who refused them, she said. The tower remembers. It remembers better after midnight. I set my mug down because my hand had learned to tremble in public and I didn't want to teach it. You set warnings. I said, give them to me in a list. She did, because she was a librarian. 1, she said, counting on the hand that wore no ring. Do not speak your full name after midnight in open air. Names. Answer. 2. If you must go out between 12 and 1, carry iron that remembers something, a key, a tool, not jewelry. 3. The 13th bell lies not about the fact of itself, but about distance. It will sound near what is far and far what is near. 4. At noon, stand under the tower's west arch. If you hear anything other than the sea and birds, do not go underground that day. 5. Children belong to the church at night, not to the street. If you see a child alone after midnight, it is either lost or the town is. Treat both as if they were yours. And Noah, I said. She touched the notebook with 2 fingers. A blessing or a goodbye? Noah walked wrong, she said. He meant to record the breath from the tower's throat. He followed it through the culvert. His last text to me was a question about the cistern ladder. The landlord left me the key, I said. Elias, she said, and it was the first time she'd used my name without placing it among the shelves. Please understand what a key is. It is not permission. It is history that wants to be repeated. I put the token and ribbon back in my pocket. The coin felt warmer than it should, as if it had a little sun inside, or a fever. Show me the Hollis plates, I said. She led me to the back, to a flat file that smelled of ferrous dust and hand soap. She rolled out a drawer. Inside, half a dozen tin plates rested on tissue. At first glance, they were nonsense. Soot dark, scratched, whirled like fingerprints pulled too large. But when she tilted one toward the window, light drew the pattern into relief. The same rising arcs the draftsman had drawn, the same breath pads curling upward. Do you see? She said. I see a path, I said. Good, she said. Because you'll be tempted to think it's a map. Outside, the hour crept. Noon, somewhere, polished itself. Mara returned the plates, retied the twine over the map case, closed the ledger. She did all this with deliberate care that I recognized from the innkeeper. This is what people do when the thing they cannot control stands up and tests the door. You'll go under, she said, not asking. Yes, I said. Tonight? No, I said, and surprised myself with the sense. You said, check at noon. I'll check. She nodded, satisfied, not with me, but with the rule. She took something from the drawer, a small horseshoe, no larger than a child's palm. Old iron, pitted, honest. She threaded a thin cord through the nail holes and handed it to me. For your pocket, she said. Ionette. Remembers word? I turned to go, then stopped. The phrase, I said, in the ledger admitted to choir. Was that a title or a sentence? Maraven, archivist, librarian, keykeeper, considered the bell-less bell on her desk, and the tower beyond we could not see. In Ravensgate, she said, we never learned to tell the difference. I stepped back into the day. The town had unfolded a little. Color had crept into its edges. The tower leaned up there on the hill, pretending to be a shape among shapes. I felt in my pocket for the little iron horseshoe in the bronze token, and for a moment couldn't tell which was warm and which was merely the memory of someone's hand. Noon would come. If the tower told the truth, then I would decide where to place my next foot. And if it lied, I would learn what the 13th bell does to distance, and to men who carry their names like unlocked doors. The day leaned toward noon with the weight of a pendulum. I climbed the hill toward St. Geraint's church. Fog trailing the edges of roofs like a shawl someone had forgotten to fold. The tower rose above the town, its stones the color of old bone, its clock faces blind in the haze. The bell chamber was open to the wind. From here, the sea was a pewter band. Somewhere gulls barked. Somewhere a dog argued with silence. I stood beneath the west arch, just as Mara had told me. I counted my breaths against the second hand of my watch. The minute clicked toward 12. When the bells began, they were ordinary, full-voiced. Brassy, honest. 1, 2, 3. Children spilled from the school below, their laughter ringing louder than any bell. Women carried baskets from the market, shouting greetings across the square. Everything was as it should be. 4, 5, 6. I waited for the trick, for the breath that Noah had written about. 7, 8, 9. The clock hands did not falter. My shadow stood straight, noon honest as a knife. 10, 11, 12, and silence, clean as linen. No 13th. Relief rose in me like heat. Perhaps the tower's curse was only at midnight. Perhaps I could walk the streets in daylight without the air itself folding. But then, faint and sly, I heard something under the silence. Not a bell, not metal, a breath drawn low, as if the tower itself sighed into the ground. The soil beneath my feet trembled, the horseshoe in my pocket warmed. I did not run. Running in Ravensgate is an invitation. I walked instead down the hill, toward the harbor. The sea looked ordinary, but its ordinary looked back at me too closely. The first night walk. That evening, I could not sit still in the inn. The landlord eyed me once, said nothing, and poured a pint. I did not drink. At 11:30 I took my coat and the iron horseshoe and stepped into the fog. The streets were mazes of lantern light and blind alleys. Ravensgate is older than maps. Admit its lanes bend to follow rumor more than reason. I walked with my phone recording, every sound a witness. Footsteps echoed mine, then not mine. At the corner of Harrow Lane, the air shifted. The cobbles sloped, though they'd always been flat. The cat from the night before darted across the street, pausing to look back at me with lantern eyes. Then it slipped into the dark. I followed. The lane forked, though it should not. On one side, the harbor. On the other, an alley I did not remember, lined with doors too narrow for any house I knew. From behind one came the sound of children chanting tuneless, wordless, like a skipping rhyme played backward. I raised my phone. The waveform jittered, then flattened. Silence recorded where sound should be. "Not for you," a voice whispered inside the microphone. "Not in the air." Back in the library the next day, Mara spread Noah's sketches across the table. He had tried to map not streets but sounds whispers at corners, knocks beneath drains, Beleco's bent wrong by fog. His maps made Ravensgate look like a lungi lease as bronca, the tower as a throat. "You see?" she said. He was charting resonance, not geography, in the margin Noah had scrawled. "The 13th does not strike space, it bends it. Streets walk where sound tells them to." I traced one line with my finger. It curved beneath the tower, through the cistern toward the harbor culvert. Mara tapped the line. "That's where he went. That's where the choir sings." Midnight again. That night I walked with the map in my pocket. Midnight swelled like a bruise. 1, 2, 3. The streets twisted. Windows turned to mirrors. Doors whispered names I hadn't spoken in years. 4, 5, 6. The fog thickened, tasting of iron. My phone died, though its battery had been full. 7, 8, 9. The horseshoe seared in my pocket. The ribbon throbbed like a pulse. 10, 11, 12, and then the breath, 13th, not above, not below, but inside my chest, as though my ribs had become the bell's cage. The cat appeared again, tail high, and slipped toward the culvert. I followed, because some roads open only once, and because Noah's name was still waiting for me in the static. The culvert's mouth sat where the quay's stone ribs met the harbor, a dark oval rimmed with weed and the pale threads of old rope. At low tide the sea pulled back like a breath held too long. The channel showed its teeth stone slick as tongue, iron ladders furred with salt. The cat went first. It paused at the lip, glanced back at me the way only cats and doctors do, then slid into the dark. I put the iron horseshoe in my coat pocket where I could feel its bite against my thigh and followed. Inside, the air changed. Harbor cold became cellar cold, a damp that spoke in the ears more than it touched the skin. My phone's dead screen offered my face back to me in a smear. I thumbed the recorder app by habit. Nothing. So I carried silence like a light. The culvert ran straight for 20 steps and then decided straight was overrated. It kinked left, right, and then down via a rung ladder whose iron tasted like pennies when my palm slipped and I caught it with my mouth. Below, a cistern spreader, black disc glazed with a thin membrane of water. On the far side, a stone arch. Beyond that, more dark. The ladder complained under my weight. When my boots found the ledge, I crouched and let my breath even out, listening. Water counted itself in drops. Somewhere far forward, a drip answered out of time, which is how you begin to know a place is wrong. Not by what it says, but by what it refuses to say together. Something bumped my ankle. The cat. It pressed against me once, permitting a single touch like a sacrament, then slipped along the ledge toward the arch. Ravensgate does not waste warnings. I remembered Mara's list. I remembered Noah's scrawl. If it knows your name, don't answer. I kept my mouth closed around myself and walked. The arch opened into a tunnel whose stones had forgotten the concept of square. The curve of the wall met the curve of the ceiling, met the curve of the floor. And if there were corners once, the sea had licked them soft. Every 15 paces, a nail had been driven into the mortar. From each nail hung a loop of braided cord ribbons, like the one I had found outside room 5. Some were new enough to hold color. Most were drained to shipwreck hues. Tea, tobacco, old blood. Under one nail, a small bronze disc lay where mildew had kept it from sliding into the channel. I knelt and turned it over with a fingertip. Admitted to choir. The same words as my token. I put it in my pocket without thinking, then caught myself and put it back on the stone. History wants to be repeated. You don't feed it. The tunnel turned. The walls tightened. My shoulders brushed clammy stone. The cat slipped through a gap I would have sworn could not fit a child. When I reached it, it unfitted itself to let me pass. I came into a chamber whose geometry broke my eyes. It was round, but the round was bent like the inside of a bell. If a bell had been grown from root and lung, the ceiling domed into dark. The floor dipped toward a center ringed by a low stone curb. Within the ring lay the shallowest pool knot, water so much as a skin reflecting nothing. My face did not appear there, neither did the ceiling. The ring hummed like a throat clearing. My pocket warmed. Iron remembered the forge. Underbell, I said before I could stop myself, and the word came back to me wearing a different coat. Underbell, echoed the chamber, and the under fell out of it, leaving bell, 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 not metal, but the idea of metal translated into breath. The 13th was not a strike. It was an exhale. I stood at the curb and felt the hair on my arms offer itself to the air. You can tell when a room has listened for a long time. It learns to scavenge the small electricity that leaks out of the living. My teeth ached. The horseshoe burned less now, as if the iron had decided this, too, was work. A sound rose too low to be called sound. If it had been visible, it would have been a ripple across oil, a hand passing under silk. It ballooned from the pool and touched the ring, the walls, the dome, and then my rib cage. My heart miscounted. My breath learned someone else's rhythm. Noah had written, bone level, fundamental 83 hertz. If he was right, my body had just become a chart. E said the room. I shut my jaws so hard pain shot into my ears. The cat vaulted the curb and walked to the pool, which is how I knew the pool had a surface. It tested it with a paw. No ripple. It peered at nothing and then recoiled. Ears flat, a sound like a broken reed in its throat. Across from me, in a shadow that had been merely decorative a moment ago, a red light blinked. The blink had a rhythm-only field recorders. Hear correctly the 1-2 of a handhold recorder in standby. I circled the ring, keeping one boot heel against the curb to remember which way was forward. The closer I came, the more the light withdrew, like a creature that has learned to be admired from a distance. It resolved into a small recorder wedged on a ledge just above shoulder height. set there to see the pool and be seen by those who needed a sign that someone had been here before. A rubber band belted a lavalier mic to its body, and the mic's wire trailed toward the dark like a fishing line lost to a sudden tide. NOAA. I lifted my hand and did not touch it. You don't touch red lights that flash in rooms that have learned your name. Instead, I leaned close and listened. Beneath the low breath room, a brighter his electronics. Cheap prints, again staged too hot by a man who liked to catch ghosts by their clothing. And under that, words Noah's voice, scrambled by distance and fear and the way sound forgets to stay itself in places like this. NOAA, Ela? He said, and then lower, almost a growl. Don't answer. I'm not, I whispered, then swallowed the rest. My throat tried to obey the room. You must never let your throat obey rooms. The mic wire twitched. It did not move like a wire. It moved like something that had decided wire was a good costume. The end of it vanished behind a slab into a seam that should not have been deep enough for a finger, let alone all the sound in Ravensgate. I put my palm to the slab. Cold, then warm, briefly, as if something behind it had leaned its face against the stone to match my hand with its own. Elias Ward, said the room, not from the mic or the recorder or the wall, but from the space between my tongue and my teeth, Squire. A dozen tiny objects skittered in the dark like beetles. I kicked one by accident and it chinked bronze on stone. Tokens. I had to decide. The pool had made the decision irrelevant. It bulged very slightly, the way water rises when a barometer falls, the way skin tightens when the breath you're holding is not your own. The dome breathed in. Somewhere far away and exactly here, 12 bells answered a clock, and the 13th prepared its mouth. Underbell, I said again, this time as if the word were a hook I could lodge in the room to arrest myself. Underbell. Underbell. The repetition changed what it was. Like saying a word enough times makes it a noise and then a mirror. The cat fled. No wisdom is wiser than a cat that decides it has paid enough attention. Don't follow, Noah had written. If you follow, you'll walk wrong. I stepped onto the curb, then off it into the ring. The floor within was not floor. It accepted my weight the way a drumhead accepts a fingertip, flexing less than the fear it causes. The breath rose into my boots. My knees tried to unlock. I held the horseshoe against my thigh through the coat, a meat hook of memory, a brutal omen. I imagined a forge. I imagined men pounding iron into shapes, with names that did not include mine. He said the room once more. A last polite inquiry before it announced to myself in a voice I would not be able to refuse. "No," I said quietly, to my tongue. From the slit behind the slab, something offered up an object. Not pushed, not thrown, offered. Like a coin written across a confessional screen. It was Noah's other recorder, the old one. The cheap silver unit he called his Seagull, because it screamed when the wind touched it. The front was scored. Salt had furred the battery door. But when I touched the play button with the edge of the horseshoe and not my finger, the little screen lit stubborn as a match. Sound filled the dome, not the breath, a human hand clapping gently. Then a voice, the voice I had fallen asleep to 1,000 nights in other countries, back when we were stupid and certain and rented flats that kept secrets only from landlords. "Test," said Noah. Sibilance. "Ward, if you get this, you're an idiot and so am I. There's a ladder Maris cistern ladder south. Culvert. Bring a line and a brick. You'll know why. The bell isn't the bell. It's a lung that forgot the body it belonged to." He laughed, a little too quickly. A man trying to make his teeth comfortable in his own mouth. "It said my name last night. Sweet as syrup," I almost answered just to hear it say it right again. "If it knows you better than your mother. Don't give it your throat. Old iron, no. Think of work. Think of ships and nails and whatever you can name that isn't you." The recording glitch clicked. Something damp touched the mic. His next words came from far away or very close. I couldn't tell. "Elias," he whispered, "if you can, make it ring wrong." The file ended in a roar, not of volume, but of pressure. The recorder shut itself with the stubborn dignity of a gull folding its wings. Make it ring wrong. Below my boots, the ring flexed in a way that made my ankles ache. The dome gathered itself like a chest about to laugh or sob. 12 farhammers counted a town that didn't know who it was. The 13th curved its breath against the seam in the slab and pulled the wire tighter. It had learned the shape of my silence. It meant to unlearn it. I reached into my pocket, found the bronze token I hadn't taken and which, nevertheless, lay in my hand. Admitted to choir. The letters burned cold. I pressed the token against the recorder's tiny onboard mic and exhaled not my name. Not a word, just breath. Wrong on purpose. A scrape of iron and blood and fear and forge. Then I tapped the token to the mic 3 times offbeat. Rude. The way you knock on the back door of a place you don't belong. The underbell flinched. It is possible for rooms to flinch. The dome withdrew a fraction. The seam exhaled a thread of air that smelled like nettles and coins. The wires slackened. The pool lost a millimeter of meniscus and found it again, surprised at the loss. Ringing wrong is not silence. Noah had meant. It's bad music. I set the recorder on record. I didn't speak. I made work. I scraped the iron horseshoe against the curb. I knocked the token against the slab 1 2 1 2 3. A pattern children know from doors and skip rope. I breathed through my teeth in a way that made my chest feel like a field of nails. I did everything ugly I could name. The 13th met me. Out of time, it reached for 12 and found 10. It tried to wear my voice and found the wrong coat. It gathered for a name and got a noise. For a second, a heartbeat that measured itself honestly, the underbell choked on me. Water, somewhere deeper, answered with a cough. The dome stuttered. Stone remembered corners. The ribbon loops on the nails stirred like weeds in a change of tide. A voice, not a room voice. Not Noah spoke just above my right shoulder. It was small. It was young. It was the voice of a boy told to sing and told he would not come home. Sir, he said, quite politely, as if the sea had taught him manners. You're not allowed. I know, I said, and my mouth did not add my name to the end of the sentence. Then go while it's wrong, he said. It only forgets itself a breath at a time. The wire twitched again, frantic now, like a line with a fish that has learned it is a fish. I stepped back over the curb and the floor forgave me for believing in it. The dome inhaled, wounded and curious. From the corridor that curled away toward the harbor, wind moved as if a door above had opened. The cat reappeared. How? Do they do that? And batted my boot, not in play, but in instruction. I followed it without looking back, because looking back is a kind of answering. The underbell exhaled once more, gently, as if to test whether I might change my mind under the pressure of being remembered. The ribbons clicked against their nails. The bronze token in my pocket hummed like a coin on a drum. At the culvert mouth the tide had turned. Water slid in a thin sheet over the lower stones. Not enough to drown a man, enough to explain him. I climbed, boots slipping, palms taking rust. At the top I lay on the keystones and let the harbor air rearrange my ribs. Behind me, down in the throat of the town, the 13th tried on someone else's name and found it did not fit. Noah had asked me to ring it wrong. I had done that once by accident and once on purpose. It would learn. Rooms learn. Bells learn. Towns do not forget themselves for long. I stood. Fog stitched the harbor mouth shut. Above, the tower watched with its blind faces. In my coat, iron-cooled and bronze, forgot a moment of music. The cat shook salt from its paw and vanished into the night in the direction of Harolenaz, if there were a procession to catch. Or as if it meant to lead me to where processions begin. I went after it, because some rules exist to be obeyed and some to be broken, and I had just broken one that would be angry in a few hours when midnight remembered how to count. The night after the underbell, Ravensgate did not sleep. Or maybe it was only me who could feel the town turning in its sheets. The harbor creaked like a bed too small for its sleeper. The roofs leaned closer together. Windows looked out, though their curtains were drawn. I followed the cat up Harrow Lane. Fog pooled ankle-deep, then knee-deep, a tide that obeyed no moon. The stones rang hollow beneath my boots, as if some other street lay beneath this one. My breath made shapes that did not vanish quickly enough. At the top of the lane, the cat stopped, tail flicking, ears pinned forward. Ahead, the square opened narrow as a breath between teeth, cobbles shining with a damp that had not come from rain. And in the square, they gathered. The first sight At first, I thought it was a festival. Some village procession the tourists never stayed long enough to see. A line of figures in white robes, hoods drawn, each carrying a candle cupped in both hands. Children walked among them, ribbons trailing from their wrists. Their steps were slow, careful, as if the cobbles themselves demanded courtesy. But no voices, no prayers, no music. Only the sound of the flames licking air and the faint scrape of leather soles. I pressed against a wall, heart hammering. The horseshoe in my pocket bit hard against my thigh. The procession did not look at me, but it did not need to. Every step seemed aware of where I stood. At the front, a figure taller than the rest carried a staff capped with bronze. Hanging from it was a disc stamped with words I already knew too well. Admitted to choir. The disc swung gently, and with each swing, the 13th bell breathed in the air above us. The children's place. The children wore no hoods. Their faces were pale in the candlelight, their eyes too old. Each carried something small, a ribbon, a token, a book of hymns, with pages missing. Their mouths moved silently, forming words I could not hear but which the fog seemed eager to repeat. One boy, I swear he could not have been older than 9, lifted his head suddenly and stared straight at me. His lips shaped my name. Elias. I jerked back, heart seizing, but the boy only lowered his gaze and walked on, as though my name had been no more than a rehearsal. The landlord's warning rang in my skull. Do not speak your full name after midnight. The choir's song. At the edge of the square, the procession stopped. The robed figures formed a ring, the children in the center. The tall leader struck the staff once against the stones. A sound rose, not metal, not wood, but the faint exhale I had heard in the underbell. The children opened their mouths together. No sound came out yet. The air filled with harmony, a terrible harmony you felt in your bones more than you heard in your ears. The windows rattled. The fog shivered. My recorder app, long dead, blinked suddenly to life in my pocket, its red light recording against my will. I clamped a hand over it. My pulse stuttered, but even through my palm, I felt the phone vibrate in time with the choir's breath. The invitation. The leader lifted his staff again. The bronze disc turned in the firelight. I saw my reflection there, warped, a stranger's face wearing mine. The boy who had mouthed my name stepped forward, holding a ribbon. It was black, frayed, tied in a figure-8 knot. He held it out toward me, though I had not moved, though I'd still pressed myself against the wall like a thief in his own town. Choir, whispered the fog. Choir. I shook my head violently, but my feet betrayed me, sliding forward a step as if the stones themselves tugged. The boy's eyes were wet, pleading. Not for himself, for me. The break in the pattern.
Then, from somewhere behind me, the cat Yulda sounds so sharp it cracked the harmony for half a breath.
The candles guttered. The boy flinched, and in that break, I heard something else, another bell. Distant, late, wrong. It rang not 12, not 13, but a cracked accidental 14. The procession recoiled, robes whispering, candles snapping out one by one. The leader slammed the staff down hard, as if to stitch the air shut, but the damage was done. The 13th had been made to ring wrong again, and it hated being mocked. The fog thrashed, windows slammed. Somewhere, a dog screamed as if skinned by silence. When I dared to open my eyes, the square was empty. No robes, no candles, no children. Only the faint smear of wax on cobbles and the smell of breath that had stayed too long. The cat brushed my leg, demanding acknowledgement. Its fur was hot, as if it had run through fire. I bent and whispered, "Thank you." It blinked. And in its eyes, for just a moment, I thought I saw Noah. I didn't sleep after the procession. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boy's face, the way he mouthed my name, the way his ribbon shook in his hand, as if he wanted me to take it, as if refusal was cruelty. By dawn, the fog had thinned, but the town did not look lighter. Ravensgate never really looked lighter. It only changed masks. The inn's common room was empty, except for the landlord, who polished glasses that didn't need polishing. He glanced at me once, then at my pocket where the horseshoe bulged, then back to the glass. "You saw them," he said. "Not a question." "The procession," I whispered. "And the children?" His hands stilled. "They're not children. Not anymore. Not once the 13th has their names. The archivist's warning." I went back to the library that morning, ribbon clenched in my fist, needing answers Mara might not want to give. She looked at me with something sharper than concern. "They noticed you. They offered me a place," I said. "Of course they did. The choir is never complete. There must always be 13. If one voice falters, another is sought, and you." She tapped the ledger where my name had been written decades ago, then half erased. "You were already promised once." "I was a child," I said. "I don't even remember." "Memory doesn't matter to bells," Mara said. "Only resonance." She drew the ledger closer, flipping pages I hadn't seen before. Scrawled notes crowded the margins. Diagrams of throats and lungs, sketches of ropes knotted like nooses. "Every 13 years, the choir renews itself," she said. "Those retained remain. Those missing are replaced." That was the rule until the 13th learned to improvise. I told her about the 14th strike, the way the procession collapsed. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with a strange satisfaction. "Good," she whispered. "It can be broken. Made to stumble." "Noah's secret." Mara handed me Noah's Field notebook again, open to a page I hadn't noticed before. A scrap of paper had been tucked deep inside, written in hurried pencil. "They want 30, but they fear 14. 14 is disorder. 14 is wrong. If you can ring a tiff, you can force it, they scatter." Noah had underlined scatter twice. "He knew," I said. "He suspected," Mara corrected. "He tested. And testing is what pulled him in." The boy's face returned in my memory, pale in the candlelight, lips forming my name. Elias. Why, children? I asked. Why always children? Mara closed the ledger softly. Because children's voices carry, because they believe before they resist, and because long ago, when plague and famine came, the town gave the tower its youngest. The bargain was never unmade. The 13th speaks. That night, I stayed awake in my room at the midnight came like a tide. 12 bells rang clean and even. Then came the 13th, but this time it was different. The sound wasn't only outside. It pressed against my ribs, filled my skull. And then words, clearer than before, wrapping around my name like ribbon. Elias Ward. Admitted. Retained. My throat tried to shape a reply. I bit down hard on my own tongue until the taste of iron filled my mouth. The ribbon on my bedside table shifted. It rose as if lifted by invisible hands and tied itself into a fresh knot. I grabbed the horseshoe. Clutching it so tightly the edges bruised my palm. The whisper recoiled slightly, but not enough. Then, faint but undeniable, another voice joined the boy from the procession. Sir? Don't answer? Please, the 13th hissed, furious, its breath shaking the window pane. The boy's voice cracked like glass, but it had given me something rare. Hesitation. Revelation. At dawn, I returned to Mara one last time. She poured tea with steady hands but eyes that refused to meet mine. You heard them, she said. They want me, I said. She nodded. They've always wanted you, but perhaps you can want something back. Break the pattern. Ring wrong again. 14 is chaos. The choir cannot hold it. And if I fail, then you will sing forever, Mara said simply. And Ravensgate will be complete again. She handed me a final object. A small hammer, black with age. This once hung in the belfry. Don't strike true. Strike? Wrong. I took it, the weight oddly comforting in my hand. The hammer weighed more than it looked. Heavy not with iron, but with years. Its handle was scarred with the grip of men who had rung bells for weddings, for deaths, for storms at sea. Mara pressed it into my hand with a finality that made my chest ache. Don't strike true, she whispered again. True is theirs, wrong is yours. I left the library as dusk collapsed into night. Fog braided itself through the alleys, wrapping the streets like bandages. The tower loomed above Ravensgate, a black tooth gnawing at the sky. The climb was not easy. The stone steps spiraled tight, worn concave by centuries of penitence and fools. Each step echoed as if the tower had been waiting for me alone. I held the horseshoe in one pocket, the ribbon in the other. The hammer gripped so tightly my knuckles went white. At the belfry, the 12 bells hung in their frames, immense and silent, their mouths yawning into the fog. Chains ran from beams to wheels, each one coiled like a snake at rest, and in the center, suspended in shadow, was the 13th. It wasn't shaped like the others, where they were smooth and bronze. It was darker, rougher, as though grown from stone and bone together. No clapper swung inside, it breathed instead, a slow inhale and exhale that stirred the air like lungs. When midnight came, the bells began their work. 12 honest strikes. 1, 2, 3. Each bell shook the tower, their tones blending into the weight of ritual. 4, 5, 6. The harbor answered with echoes. 7, 8, 9. The floor thrummed. Dust sifted from the beams. 10, 11, 12. The town held its breath. The 13th exhales. The 13th opened its mouth and breathed. My ribs rattled. My vision blurred. The ribbon in my pocket writhed like a living thing, knotting itself tighter. My name sounded in the air, whispered from every direction, whispered from inside my chest. Elias Ward. Retained. I nearly dropped the hammer. My throat tried to obey, to shape words I did not mean. I clamped my teeth shut until blood warmed my tongue. The children's voices rose from below dozens, maybe hundreds singing in silence, a harmony of breath and absence. The choir had gathered. They were waiting for me to join, striking wrong. No, I muttered, not today. I swung the hammer not at the 13th, but at the wheel of the 11th. The strike was clumsy, ugly, offbeat. The bell jerked and gave a straying lad half-note that cracked across the night. The harmony faltered. The 13th hissed, its breath becoming jagged. I struck again, this time against the frame of the 9th. The wood shrieked. Metal clanged against stone. The sound was chaos-wrong, discordant, ugly. 14. The air convulsed. The tower roared in protest. The 13th bellowed a note so low the marrow in my bones shivered. Below, the choir broke. Their song shattered into cries, whispers, laughter twisted into screams. Candles guttered, robes dissolved into fog. The face of the 13th. And then I saw it. The 13th bent itself forward, its surface rippling like flesh, its hollow mouth forming not a bell but a face that wore no features except a hunger to speak. It whispered again, louder. Elias! I raised the hammer, trembling, and slammed it against the railing knot. True, not rhythmic, just noise. The 14th rang again, raw and broken. The face convulsed. The breath became a shriek, a tide of sound that bent the air until it warped the stars. The collapse. The tower shook. Stone cracked, beams split. I stumbled, gripping the railing as fragments rained around me. The 12 bells swung wildly, some clashing against each other, some spinning as if desperate to escape their harness. The 13th wailed. Not a bell now, not even a lung. Something older, angrier, robbed of its pattern. Its mouth opened wide, so wide it was no longer a mouth, but a void, a tunnel into which every whisper, every lost voice, every retained child seemed to pour. And in that void, I saw Noah, his face pale, eyes hollow, but his lips moved. He mouthed one word, wrong. The 14th resounds. I struck once more. The hammer clanged against the floor, against stone, against anything, and the 14th bell rang again, jagged, cracked, imperfect, perfectly wrong. The void howled, the choir dissolved into nothing. The ribbons unknotted themselves and fell limp to the stones. The bronze tokens scattered like coins thrown from a dead man's hand. The 13th recoiled, its shape unraveling. The face split, dissolved, and collapsed into breath, into fog, into silence. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor of the belfry, the hammer lying beside me. My chest ached as though I had been struck from within. The 12 bells hung still, cracked and chipped, but silent. And the 13th was gone. Not broken, not shattered, simply gone, as though it had never been. When I came to, dawn had already broken over Ravensgate. The sky was a thin wash of gray, and gulls wheeled in ragged circles as though they, too, had woken from a nightmare. The belfry was silent. The ropes hung slack, the wheels still. The 12 bells looked battered, edges chipped, but they were only bells again, mute, dumb, bronze. The 13th was gone, not shattered, not fallen, gone. The space it had occupied was empty air, as if the tower had exhaled too deeply and forgotten to breathe back in. I stood, my body stiff and bruised. The hammer lay where I'd dropped it, its head cracked, handles splintered. It had given more than it was built to give. I picked it up anyway and carried it down the spiral stair. The town wakes. Ravensgate stirred cautiously. Curtains parted, doors opened a crack. People stepped into the streets as though testing the ground. No procession marched this morning. No whispers leaked from the alleys. The town felt hollow. The landlord met me at the inn's door. He looked me up and down, took in the dust, the blood on my sleeve, the hammer in my hand. He said nothing's just nodded once, the way men nod at storms that have passed without sinking their boats. Inside, the inn smelled of bread and coffee, normal smells. The fire burned low, ordinary orange. For the first time since arriving, Ravensgate seemed like a town and not a waiting room for something else. Maras? Verdict. I went back to the library by noon. Mara was there. As always, ledger open, pen steady. She looked up, and in her eyes, I saw it. She already knew. You rang it wrong? She said. I rang it broken. I corrected. 14. Her lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. Then Ravensgate will breathe differently now. For a time, Patter's return, she said. What you did was not erasure. It was interruption. The choir will try again in another season, another year. But you've given the town a silence it has not known in a century." She slid a slip of paper across the desk. It was torn from Noah's notebook, his handwriting jagged. "If we can make it stumble, maybe someone else can make it fall." Noah's fate. I asked her the question I'd been avoiding. "Noah?" Mara's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Some are retained forever. Some are released when the pattern breaks. I cannot say which he was." But that night, when I replayed the broken recorder I'd carried down from the tower, I heard something faint under the distortion. Noah's laugh. Short, surprised, free. I chose to believe he was gone the way the 13th was gone. Not destroyed, but set loose. The last walk. On my final evening in Ravensgate, I walked the harbor. The fog was lighter. Almost playful, the water lapped against the stones like it had business elsewhere. Children's laughter, real children this time, code from the pier. No whispers. At the edge of the quay, I dropped the cracked hammer into the sea. It sank with a soundless weight, bubbles rising like coins offered to something deeper. The horseshoe I kept. Some iron remembers better than men. Epilogue. I boarded the ferry at dawn. As the engines rumbled and the pier drifted away, I turned to watch the town recede. Ravensgate huddled on its cliffs, roofs tight as fists, tower crooked against the pale sky. The 12 bells hung silent. The 13th was gone. And yet, as the ferry crossed the last strip of water, I thought I heard something not loud, not near, but thin and tired, like a ghost of sound. 1, 2, 3. I gripped the horseshoe in my pocket. 4, 5, 6. The gulls screamed overhead. 7, 8, 9. The ferry horn blared, shaking the air. 10, 11, 12. And silence. No 13th. Not this time. I exhaled and let the sea carry me away. But in the hollow of that silence, I knew Ravensgate was only resting. And somewhere, in some forgotten corridor beneath the tower, a breath still waited, patient as stone, for the day someone would ring it true. Asterisk, you've just heard the story of the 13th Bell of Ravensgate. But remember, if you ever hear the clock strike, don't answer when it calls your name. If this story chilled you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Midnight Whispers for more haunting tales every week. Until next time, keep your whispers close and your lights dimmed.